So it is a distinct honor at this time for me to introduce our keynote speaker. Eboo Patel is founder and president of the Interfaith Youth Core, a nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing interfaith cooperation and understanding across the United States through a range of workshops and trainings and other activities with special attention to college-age students and young adults. And no doubt Interfaith Youth Core has been involved on a number of your campuses. Through his work with IFYC and as an author and speaker, Eboo has become a leading voice in our country in support of interfaith dialogue and religious pluralism. A message I'm sure we would all agree is especially needed in our current climate. He has a particular belief as well that colleges and universities have a role and a power to play in modeling and leading the way. In addition to his writing contributions to a number of publications, he's the author of over half a dozen books, including one published last year, Interfaith Leadership, a primer. He was a member of President Obama's inaugural Faith Council, has been the recipient of many awards. He has been recognized with a number of honorary degrees, including one from Loyola University, Chicago. And so that means that we can greet him here this morning as a member of our Jesuit Ignatian family. Please join me in welcoming Eboo Patel.
So I'm going to do a lot of things differently this morning. One is I'm going to sit in the course of this talk. This is a different talk for me. It's not a bring the thunder talk. It's a struggle through news stories and ask the question of what these stories might mean. I think of a worldview like a perfectly fried egg. You know what I'm talking about? And the last 2 years have scrambled that egg for me, if you will. And I guess I could insist on it being perfectly round and perfectly done. But frankly, I think that part of the commitment of an intellectual is to not squeeze the world into your worldview. It's when events in the world overturn your worldview, you shift and expand and wonder. And so if it's okay, I'm going to wonder aloud with you all and do some things quite a bit differently. I'm going to say multiple times during the course of my talk, you probably invited me here to do X, Y, and Z. Somebody should do that. It's not going to be me. In some ways, this is different, but in some ways it's also, at least as I think of this audience, if there's one audience I could do this with, it's you all, right? I've spent a lot of time on your campuses. Loyola University of Maryland was the first campus to invite me to do a book discussion of my first book, Acts of Faith, the first campus to host that as a common book read. And that was about 10 years ago, and I still remember the energy of the students there. Father Garanzini at Loyola University of Chicago gave me that honorary degree, told me that he did so because he knew that my convocation or my commencement address would be appropriately short, and invited me to write my second book in his office overlooking Lake Michigan. And I see my friend Amir Hussein here is at the other Loyola University on the West Coast, not far from here. In any case, I've had the opportunity to have lots of intellectual conversations with people at Jesuit universities about tentative ideas. And so in that way, this is a continuation of that. So let me begin with an uncomfortable story. 8 or 9 years ago, I'm speaking at a cool little college outside of Pittsburgh. And it turns out that it's a double keynote, and I'm on stage with a guy named Necker van Berzani, who was introduced to me as an Iraqi leader. This is actually about 12 years ago, must 2005, 2006. It's at the height of the Iraq War. And I hear the term Iraqi leader, and a set of lights go off in my head. And I shake his hand and I give him my salam. And the first thing I say is, I apologize for the destruction that my government is inflicting upon your country. I apologize for the Iraq War. I want to let you know that the American people feel differently than the American government on this score. And he kind of looked at me, and I thought maybe his English wasn't so good. And so I repeated what I said. I said, I apologize for the actions of the Bush administration in Iraq. And he looked at me again, and this time I knew he understood me. And he said, the only thing you should be apologizing for is your government didn't do this 25 years ago. I'm a Kurd, and that son of a gun committed war crimes against my people for decades. It's not a story that I like sharing, right? I look like the fool in that situation. Let's unpack it for a second. What's wrong with this scenario? Number one, I had a definition of justice that I assumed he shared. It's an uncomfortable beginning for a conference on justice. I had a definition of justice that I assumed he shared. Number two, I homogenized a large community of people, in fact, two large communities, Iraqis and Muslims, one of which I belong to, and assigned that community a worldview, which happened to be my own. Frankly, this is not uncommon for the tribe to which I belong. That tribe I would call multicultural progressives. It is a tribe that I am proud to belong to. It is a tribe like any tribe with its own set of biases and preferences, its own logic and teleology, and its own blind spots. What's a brief definition of a multicultural progressive? It's somebody who privileges particular identities. By the way, all of which make a ton of sense to me. I want to keep on saying, I belong to this tribe. Okay? And assigns those identities particular worldviews. You might be your first year orientation leaders in 2 or 3 weeks, if they share this worldview, might believe that a first-year African-American student in their group, by dint of their identity, is a supporter of the worldview that is the Black Lives Matter movement. Might find that worldview complicated if that student says, well, my dad's a cop. Might. But for people like me, and this is still the case with me, I privilege certain identities, I pay special attention to them, and I orient my definitions of justice around those identities. Let me put this succinctly. I have preferred identities, and I assign them my favored view of justice. And of course, the world is complicated. So, what happens when, in the case of Nekrv and Barzani, I get it wrong? What happens when my preferred identity actually says, I don't want you to tell me who to be? When they disinvite me from assigning them my favored view of justice? What happens when insisting on a uniform view of justice actually homogenizes a community. I've been thinking about this a lot recently. None of these, by the way, I want to keep on repeating, are happy thoughts, right? These are complicated thoughts, right? And again, in my mind, the commitment of an intellectual is not to find more cases that support his or her worldview. It is precisely to identify cases that complicate it, right? I am not principally a sloganeer for a cause. I am principally somebody who looks at the complicated nature of the world and asks the question, how do we negotiate this terrain so that as many people as possible can thrive? Right? I raise these questions in that spirit. The way that I have become accustomed to think of diversity as a multicultural progressive is as different races, ethnicities, genders, sexualities, religions. But if I am in a room that is highly colorful and in which people pray in different ways, and when I use the word social justice, everybody defines it similarly, is that a diverse room? Knowing that we live in a world in which people have different definitions of justice. If I have created a room in which people share a definition of justice, choose the top 10 issues in American life, abortion, marriage equality, the way that I talk about them, you will know where I stand on them, right? Immigration rights, et cetera, et cetera. If everybody in the room on the top 10 issues in American life is somewhere between 2 and 6 inches to the left of center, and we know we live in a roughly 50-50 country, 45-55 country, in which a significant segment of the population is 2 to 6 inches right of center, is that a diverse room? Doesn't diversity mean both the differences you like and the differences you don't like? I say this to my kids all the time, by the way. Diversity is not just the differences you like. In other words, diversity complicates, raises questions about, at the very least, is in tension with definitions of justice. By the way, does anybody believe that Nechervan Barzani does not have a right to his view on the Iraq War? That's diversity. I think about this increasingly in 3 paradigms, right? 3 paradigms of diversity. I want to make quick work of the first one. It's worth mentioning because it is the predominant paradigm, the predominant diversity paradigm in America. But it's probably the kind of thing that we could all dismiss relatively easily. It's elementary school diversity or bumper sticker diversity. It's multiculturalism is our strength stuff. It's the posters all over my kids' elementary schools. I call this samosas and egg rolls diversity, right? It's the everything that tastes good form of diversity. So let's just recognize that is better. That is better than lots of other things, okay? But I imagine that we're past that, okay? So the second paradigm is the one that is predominant in higher education. It's the power, privilege, and oppression paradigm, right? It's the one that is broadly shared by people like me, multicultural progressives. A friend of mine once told me, all paradigms are wrong, some paradigms are useful, right? What does it mean to be useful? Which is say, how much explanatory power does this paradigm have? So I've been committing a heresy recently. I have been looking for cases in which the multicultural progressive paradigm, power, privilege, and oppression, has limited explanatory power. Okay? Again, I think this is the commitment of an intellectual, right? This is This is what Karl Popper talked about in falsification theory, which I'm not talking about any pure version of that, right? But that part of what scientists should seek to do is to disprove their theories. Look for the examples that disprove the theory, right? I think people in the world of the social sciences or the social arts, the humanities should try to do the same thing. What are the cases that your paradigm doesn't explain? So here's one. So I'm a brown guy. I'm a Muslim. I've also been stunningly fortunate, largely because of America. My parents came here in the 1965 Immigration Act, which, by the way, if like many of the South and East Asians you know are engineers and doctors, et cetera, it's not because India has like a higher quotient of intelligence than other countries. It's because the 1965 Immigration Act, which opened the doors of immigration to non-Europeans, right? America had a racist immigration policy from at least 1882 to 1965. It only let in people who were seeking certain sorts of education or had certain professions, right? So I'm a child of that. My parents came here educated and came here knowing education for their kids was their ticket. I started an organization called Interfaith Youth Core, and I built that organization. And alhamdulillah, it has also allowed me to live a upper middle class life. And part of what that has afforded is my extended family collectively bought a small cottage about 90 minutes north of Chicago on the Michigan shores where I write. And the people that we hire to take care of the yard and the cottage, et cetera, when we're not there, are a white working class family who lives there full time down the street. The matriarch of the family asked for our business and said, "My family has been cleaners for 3 generations." She said it proudly. "My family has been cleaners for 3 generations. We do lawns, we shovel snow, we would like to clean your house." White family. She charges $40 for a snow shovel. So I'm up there last holiday season working on interfaith leadership a couple holiday seasons ago, and pay the $40 for the snow shoveling, and wake up the next morning and there's other people shoveling snow at the house across the street owned by an upper middle class Michigan family. So I walk over there, a couple of white guys with snow blowers, ask them what they charge. $40. Sounds like that's the rate, right? $40. So that night, I go and I have a dinner that costs $40, okay, on the writing grant that I got. And I come back, and at the other wealthy Chicagoan's house on the other side of the street, there's somebody shoveling the snow. And I walk over there, and it's a Mexican guy. And we banter for a few minutes. You do not see a lot of brown folks in this area. And so we fist bump and kind of talk for a little bit. And I ask him how it is. Not a lot of folks look like him or me. And he gives me this look and he's like, "It's so much better than where I came from." Right? Like, I can send my kids to school, I can make a living, I can work. I'm not afraid of violence. Ask him how much he charges. $25. I'm like, "You are my man." I get his name in my phone, we fist bump, I turn around. Lisa, the woman from the white working class family, who has presented, again, herself to my family when we bought the house 5 years ago. "I come from 3 generations of cleaners. We would like to take care of your house." She's at her mailbox. She's watched the whole exchange. She looks at me and she just shakes her head. And she turns around and walks into her house. So my dad was in India at the time. He has a recognizably Muslim first name, Sadruddin. This is the time when the Muslim ban is being bandied about. Tell me, what's justice in this situation? Who's privileged? Who's oppressed? It just seems to me complicated, right? Does Lisa not have a right to build her life? $40 is the going rate, seems to me. She's got a kid in college. Does Juan not have a right to escape the violence from where he is coming from and to make a living, which means charging what he can get and undercutting somebody else's rate? Do I not have a right to, as a Muslim, to buy a second home, write a book? It's a challenging situation. The reason I bring it up is because it's a tense situation, right? Lisa is basically like, really, dude? Really? I've been doing this for years. My dad did this. My granddad did this. We built a life doing this. Your parents stepped off a plane 35 years ago because America needed doctors and engineers, didn't invest in the school that I went to so I could be a doctor or an engineer, brought them in from elsewhere. This is one way to read the 1965 Immigration Act. They knew that education was their ticket. We live in an open society. They maneuvered to get you into the public schools that would get you to the University of Illinois, that would allow you to win a Rhodes Scholarship, to start an organization so you could buy a second home on my block and I could clean it, and now you're going to go get this other dude to shovel the driveway for $15 less than I charge? What's justice? Right? I mean, I guess there's some post-colonial graduate seminar somewhere that could like parse this, you know, add up points on the intersectionality scale or whatever. I don't know, you know. But honestly, I just think it complicates the paradigm. It complicates the paradigm. So let me tell you, I think every paradigm is complicated. I am not talking about taking power, privilege, and oppression paradigm out of use. I'm just asking questions about the limits of its usability. Right? I also want to ask questions about the self-righteousness in which it is inflicted. And I want to raise that question right now at an enormously fragile point in the American project. And I want to do it through this story. So I have met, Lisa and her family might well be Trump supporters. Never had that conversation with them. But in my circles, I have met two people who have admitted to being Trump supporters. I probably, I speak on 20, 25 college campuses for a living. I meet lots and lots of people. It just shows you how narrow my world is. That of the literally north of 1,000 people that I have a conversation with every year, 2 of them wind up being Trump supporters, both of which I started the conversation with, right? So one of them is this guy who is my driver from the Newark airport to Princeton. You'll remember a year or two ago at a time of, this is pre-Trump era, and there were a set of challenging diversity and multiculturalism issues on campuses across the country. Of course, that is continued. If you're Princeton, this is a true story. The provost is like, we'll just drop $250,000 into a diversity pot, and y'all go get yourself a bunch of speakers. I'm that guy. I'm one of those guys. So I arrive at the Newark airport at 11 a.m. one day, and Mickey is my black car driver to Princeton. And we start talking politics, and he tells me that he's a Trump supporter, and I'm like stunned, which of course is so stupid, right? Like, did I think Trump supporters lived on Mars? Seriously, right? Like did I not think in a relatively 50-50 country that I had a 50-50 chance of running into one? Anyway, We're talking, in a lot of ways, it's a story that I had been reading about, but I frankly never met anybody who lived the Rust Belt 80s, 90s story. That this is how narrow my world is, right? I'd never met somebody who was a factory worker or had an intimate conversation with somebody who's it's an hour-long drive, right? Closed space, intimate conversation. Ford or GM for 25 years, makes seatbelt parts, very proud of it. Factory moves to Mexico, he's cobbling together odd jobs, right? And he keeps on saying, Trump is a wrecking ball, and he's going to destroy the way things are up there, and we need a little bit of that. And there's no small amount of just objective craziness coming out of his mouth, but the basic story makes sense to me, right? And I just read this article about how the only group for which mortality rates has risen in America in the last 20 years were working class white folks. And I'm like, that was just a front page New York Times article. And now it's a person. It's you. So we get to Princeton, and I'm shuttled into the house with, the multiculturalism house, the Carl Field Center, I think it's called, 50 students of color, talking about how tough their lives are, right? And I can get it that their lives are tough at Princeton. What I mean by that is there is a modal student at Princeton, and let me put it this way, his name is not Amin, okay? Right? I can't get Mickey out of my mind, right? In part because we get to Princeton, and he looks around, he's like, man, I'd do anything to be here. Kind of says this wistfully, as if I'm not there, right? Like he just says it. And so I can't help but think of him. So I'm in the room with these 50 students who are there, who are at Princeton. Okay? And they're just talking about how tough their lives are. And I'm trying to empathize, which I am, and I'm like, other people exist too, right? So I tell them about Mickey. And I'm like, would any of you like to trade places with him? Would you prefer to be a 50-year-old working class guy whose factory job moved to Mexico 5 years ago and who's cobbling together things? Would any of you like to trade places with him? And there's a long pause. And one of them says to me, you've internalized your own racism. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's like, you are so uncomfortable sitting in the back of a car being driven by a white guy that you have lifted him up into the status that we should rightfully occupy, which is the status of the oppressed. Interesting, Again, many things can be true. Great line by Susan Sontag, right? Whatever is happening, there is always something going on. You can feel very uncomfortable at Princeton as a kid named Amin, and the white working class driver of the car can be like, I used to have a better life. Many things can be true at once. So then I asked these students, have any of you heard of the recent study that says that the only group in America for whom mortality rates have risen are working class white folks? Nobody had heard of it. It was a study done by Princeton economists, right? That's not a joke. That's not a joke. Something that Mickey said in that car ride is something that I will never forget. So I'm telling him, what about this crazy thing Trump said about Muslims? What about this crazy thing Trump said about Mexicans? All of which are totally crazy, totally oppressive. And he's like, yeah, I don't like that stuff. And then he says to me, do you remember when Hillary Clinton said, we're going to put a lot of coal miners out of work? And I'm like, no. And he's like, nobody I drive to Princeton ever remembers that. Complicated my paradigm, right? Who would you rather be? A kid named Amin at Princeton or Mickey? So, what's the third paradigm? Are you guys mad at me yet, by the way? I think so. Father Garanzini was like, they'll really like your talk. I was like, you sure? Third paradigm. The paradigm of pluralism. For whom my guide is that great Jesuit philosopher, John Courtney Murray. You knew I would get to it sometime, right? So here's what Murray says. Coexistence within the one political community of groups who hold divergent and incompatible views implies disagreement and dissension within the community, but it also implies a community within which there must be agreement and consensus. In other words, isn't the definition of a diverse society a society in which different people and communities hold divergent and, in Murray's term, incommensurable views of justice? And isn't the good society the society that can hold all those people together without having them go to war? In other words, the society is the table. The views of justice are different seats around the table. The society is called pluralism or civilization, which Murray defines as talking together and living together, from the Latin. Conversation, talking together and living together. Views of justice are seats around the table. They are not the table themselves. This is the argument point, right? And if you suggest that the view of justice is the table, what do you do with Necker van Barzani? What Murray is saying is, what do you think you get when you deal with diversity? You get incommensurable views of justice. Welcome to life. Would you prefer a society in which one view of justice dominates all the others? And what if that's not your view? Like November 2016. What if it's not your view? Civilization is men, I'm going to say people, my multicultural progressive stripes show themselves, people locked together in argument. That's civilization. Straight from We Hold These Truths by John Courtney Murray. Right? Who is the barbarian? Again, from Murray. The barbarian is the person who destroys the conversation. Murray points out there's a variety of ways to destroy the conversation. You can do it with a Book Brothers suit and a ballpoint pen. You can do it by shouting somebody off the stage. But he says, make no mistake, right? Talking together and living together amongst people who have divergent views of justice, incommensurable views of the common good, that's civilization. I like to think of this in terms of what does it mean to build a healthy, religiously diverse democracy? Let's define our terms. Democracy, not just a society in which people elect their representatives, a society in which people can bring their personal convictions into public life. Diversity, not just the differences you like, not just your view of justice or mine. Diversity is also the differences you don't like. Religion, per Tillich, about ultimate concerns, about views of justice. A religiously diverse democracy is a place where people with divergent, incompatible, and incommensurable views on matters of ultimate concern all have the ability to bring those views into the public square, which is precisely why political philosophers for generations thought it was a recipe for a civil war. This is no small thing. Okay. American civilization is a massive achievement. It is a massive achievement. Michael Walzer, the great political philosopher, points out that for centuries, political philosophers believed that the only way to have a democracy was to have a homogeneous population, racially, ethnically, primarily religiously, right? One religious communion makes one state. An identity makes a people, makes a society, makes a state. This is from the Greeks. These are not dumb people who believed this. Why did they believe it? Because they knew that people of different identities are likely to have different views of justice. And if you have a democracy and people from one identity with a particular view of justice wins an election or a discourse, the other group can get violent. Kenya is a middle-income democracy. 10 years ago, in an election largely divided by ethnic groups, 1,000 people died, killed each other after an election. America just went through a political revolution a year ago. Nobody fired a shot based on the revolution itself. That's a stunning achievement. Right? Walzer, in this little book, What It Means to Be an American, after he points out this little fact about political philosophy, he ends that section. He begins the next one with the line, until the United States of America. First country to believe that you could have a diverse democracy. In other words, to believe in the Latin version of conversation, that people from different views, different identities, incommensurable notions of justice, they could live in a society together. They could live together and talk together. They could work it out together. Somebody who holds views that are anathema to me could win an election, and I wouldn't fire a shot. And I didn't. You probably didn't either. That's a massive achievement. What does it mean to protect that fragility? What's the institution that is best positioned to do so? Murray thinks, I think, I imagine you think, it's the university. Why? University does a couple of things, Murray points out. Number one, it brings intelligence in its research and teaching and knowledge creation functions to the understanding of diverse identities, which Murray beautifully calls conspiracies. Right? We should learn the stories of these conspiracies, Murray says. Number two, it is a container in which creeds can be at war intelligibly. I am not smart enough to come up with that line. That's straight Murray. That's such a beautiful, the definition of a university is a place where creeds are at war intelligibly. Number 3, it is a place where people can learn what Murray calls something of the silver thread of conversation through the otherwise dark and bloody pages of history. That they can know that the identity groups, the conspiracies, the creeds that are at war intelligibly on a campus, that they have also cooperated. They have also worked together. Okay? The healthy part of healthy, religiously diverse democracy is that people who disagree on some fundamental things are able to work together on other fundamental things. In my mind, that's a principle, right? What am I going to do to a Trump voter? Denounce them out of the country? What am I going to do if my neighbor is a Trump voter and she's got a kid in each arm and 6 grocery bags in the car? Do I not help her carry her groceries upstairs? Seriously. Because I disagree with her on one fundamental thing, do I say that negates the opportunity for relationships on anything else? Do I not join the PTA if she does? My younger son's Little League baseball team was coached by a Palestinian and a Jew. They disagree in the Middle East. Should they not coach Little League baseball together? Serious question. That is a serious question. That is a serious question. How do you have a diverse democracy unless people can disagree on some fundamental things and still work together on other fundamental things? One of the questions that I ask fire-breathing dragon 19-year-olds who I remember deeply being said fire-breathing dragon 19-year-old with my political views. One of the questions I ask them is, on the top 10 issues in American political life, what may I disagree with you on and not be called an oppressor? Can I disagree with you on anything? And if I can't, do you really just want to homogenize me? Do you really believe in a diverse democracy? Or do you want us to all think the same? And what if a part of my identity as a Kurd or a Muslim or a pro-life Catholic puts me in a justice quandary with you? What do we do? Murray would say we live together and we talk together, and we do it in the space of universities. That's where we learn how to do it. It is our laboratory, our model. I also think it's a launching pad, right? If universities are able to do this, to be a space of considerate conversation amongst divergent, incompatible, and incommensurable views of justice, which is to say, different identity groups, students will learn that process. They will learn what it takes. They will learn to develop an appreciative knowledge for the stories of identity groups with whom they might disagree. They will learn something of the silver thread of civilization and conversation that runs through the dark and bloody pages of history. They will learn that humankind has disagreed on sets of things and still managed to work together on other things, right? Abraham Joshua Heschel in Selma, 1965. The way Martin Luther King Jr. and I pray is different. But in Selma, it felt my legs were worshiping. Abraham Joshua Heschel didn't call the Hebrew Bible the Old Testament. He didn't regard Jesus as the Son of the living God, as Martin Luther King Jr. did. Those are not insignificant disagreements for a rabbi and a reverend, but they did not cancel out the opportunity to work together on something else. Isn't it important for students to learn that? And not just the knowledge of it, but the skills of it. One of my favorite lines in any tradition is Dorothy Day saying, I want to help build a society where it is easier for people to be good. What does Murray want? A society in which it is easier for people to cooperate. Easier for people to cooperate. Here's the thing, that doesn't fall from the sky or rise from the ground. People build it. People make the decision to disagree on the Middle East and to coach Little League together, to disagree on marriage equality and to work on the PTA together, to disagree on abortion and still perform heart surgeries in hospitals together. They agree to disagree on certain dimensions of justice and work together on other fundamental things. Typically the building of a civil society, right? Little leagues, social services, bowling leagues, PTAs. This is American civil society. This is the place where people from divergent views of justice manage to do things together. It is part of the Catholic genius in America. It is not, in my mind, it's no coincidence that it was a Catholic Frenchman, de Tocqueville, who recognizes the associational genius of America in the early 19th century. Your universities, your hospitals, your social service agencies are massive contributors to American civil society. People learn the art of association, the American genius, the ability to create spaces where it is easier for people to cooperate at universities, particularly universities that seek to model this. This is what we do at IFYC, the organization that I run. We help young people become interfaith leaders on their university campuses. In fact, as I'm here in Seattle, there are 400 young people in Chicago right now in an interfaith leadership training, learning the art that John Courtney Murray talked about, how to create those spaces. I'm going to leave you with 2 lines, and then we will be locked together in argument for the next 15 or 20 minutes. Line number 1 from Aimé Césaire. In fact, I first heard this from my friend Amr Hussein from Loyola Marymount, maybe 10 years ago at AAR. He says, there is room at the rendezvous to destiny. There is room for all of us. There is room for all of us at the rendezvous to destiny. What does it look like for Lisa and Juan and me to thrive? What does it look like for those students of color and Mickey, the driver, to thrive? Do I have to make somebody the oppressor all the time? What does it look like for all of us to thrive? Right? Perhaps the paradigm of the pluralist society that John Courtney Murray presents is more useful in some cases than the power, privilege, and oppression paradigm. Finally, I'll leave you with Gwendolyn Brooks from the South Side of Chicago. We are each other's business. We are each other's harvest. We are each other's magnitude and bond. Jazakallahu khairan. May God give you goodness. Thank you.